when I was asked to present what Telefonica is doing with open source, I thought it would be useful to understand why we're working in open source before looking at what we're doing there and what are the use cases. So why are we working in open source? Because it's a necessity. We're living in a world that is changing rapidly, and that change, as far as network operators is concerned, is problematic. It's problematic because, well, basically, if your traffic is doubling every 18 months or so, I mean, until now it was good news because we would charge for every byte that you could use and every minute that you would call and every text that you would send. But bundling unlimited bundles, that's a self-inflicted wound, but that's not the problem. The problem is 80% of the traffic is video, and we discussed it yesterday, but you know, 10 minutes of video, whether they're SD, HD, 1080p, 2K, 4K, augmented, mixed virtual reality, they can have an impact of 10x, 100x on your network, but the user is not going to pay twice or 10 times for that same service. It's the same service, it's the same experience. As your traffic grows, your revenue don't grow. Your revenue are actually flat in the best of case, your revenue per user, and in many cases they actually are reducing. So your traffic is growing. The way you buy capacity for your network is somewhat proportional to that traffic, so your costs are growing, and your revenue per user is decreasing. So on one hand, you can go and get more users, but in a market that is fairly penetrated, that's a difficult proposition. And on the other hand, we have competition that's increasing and new entrants. And we've seen already in Europe rumors of new entrants in the last protected area of telcos, which is those that are doing triple play, the TV and the sports, you know. What happens if tomorrow some of the large video aggregators buy rights to the Champions League, to the Liga? Sorry, I'm saying football, but I'm talking about the real football, the one you play with your foot. Anyways, and obviously, this is a market that is going in that direction, and whether it's going to be this year or in 3 years, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So, well, network operators, well, in order to remain profitable, have to do two simple things. They have to reduce their costs and increase their revenue. It's very easy, right? I mean, it's just math. So reducing your costs, obviously there's a number of technologies that are going to help us there, virtualization, software-defined networking, and open source being one of them. And monetization, well, monetization, that's probably difficult because we haven't been very good at creating new services. We've created very effective services for everybody: voice, messaging, video, data. Those services that everybody loves, but they're the same for everybody. And the value of those services is decreasing over time. I mean, they're a given. So for us to be profitable in the long term and get out of this vicious circle, we need to transform. And transformation is more than buying a new technology. It's more than getting a bunch of consultants to tell us how well the other companies are doing. It comes from within. It comes from actually doing things differently. And doing things differently in telco starts with open source. So I'll pass quickly, but we've been used to creating very effective, high availability services over time, and we started by creating slices, physical slices, and now we're moving to a new world, but basically, we've created services that are the same for everybody and that work very well for everybody. We think that in the future, in order to be more effective and to be more attractive to our customers, we need to create services that are a little bit more differentiated. So different flavors of the same services. That is what software slicing is about. So creating basically different pipes within our networks to be able to manage separately a number of different experiences, a number of different technologies, all over our IP network. Well, I happen to think that this is not sufficient and that having 3, 4, 5, 10 slices is not going to cut it. I mean, at the end of the day, our customers are all different. And the theory tells us that when a market is penetrated, when you have a high level of maturity, one way to differentiate is through personalization. So I think that one way for us to move forward on the monetization aspect is going to be to personalize our services, to create services that are going to be adapted to customer segments. So one size fits all is dead. I don't think you can have a voice service that is going to be the same voice service for everybody in your population and remain profitable in the long term. I think some people will do it and will do it very well for small, with large swath of population with very small margin. But I think those operators that want to create value, to delight their customers, they're going to have to investigate how to create many experiences. Many experiences for different segments of population and different type of users, but also different type of services, different type of industries. So doing that with the way we build our networks today is very difficult. Very difficult because at the end of the day, as you know, doing anything in a network today takes 18 months, a few $1 million, and talking to probably 15 to 20 different vendors. And that's not going to get us to having those hundreds or thousands of different slices. That's not going to be scalable. That's not going to be profitable. So the only way to do that is to change a little bit and simplify the way we do networks. And to do that efficiently is to provide an abstraction layer that is going to be able to architect our networks. And hopefully, with that, we're going to be able to see some interesting results with, different flavors of our existing services, and as well, maybe a few weird ones. And it's all good. It's all good because failing is desirable. We don't have a crystal ball, and again, we don't have a lot of experience in creating a lot of successful services. So it's going to take 10, 20, 50, 100 services to be created and to be launched on a very small scale until we find those services that are going to be successful at a large scale. And that's okay, but that can be done only if you have a network that's very agile and programmable. And either you can do that by giving a big check to a big company that's going to do it all for you, but you haven't really solved the problem because once it's done, they're going to sell it to your competitor that's going to be able exactly the same thing as you do. So there has to be a way to achieve that programmability and to retain some control. And one of the bets is to use open source for that. So we're not traditionally software developers. I mean, there was a time where network operators were developers of products, and they were doing that a lot. And then there has been that race for 3G and 4G that has basically forced efficiency and that has offloaded to all that capacity to our vendors. Now it's time to go back to an equilibrium where we acquire and retain some of those capabilities of programmability. So these are the three main groups in which we are doing open source activity. Our first foray is open source MANO. We'll go into that in a few minutes. ONF, the Open Networking Foundation, is something that we have started for a few years now, and we're part of the board of the ONF. And the Telecom Infra project is something that we have been scaling up in our investment, and we are also part of the board, and I'll go into more detail in a few seconds. Using open source communities is a means to an end. It allows us to identify open source software and to see how to apply and modify that open source software to make it adapted to our needs. And ultimately, it allows us to feed within our existing projects. Here you have two examples, one called Internet para Todos that we announced and launched at Mobile World Congress this year. It's an effort to connect the unconnected in Latin America. The other one being On Life Network, something that we haven't launched officially yet, but probably Mobile World Congress next year will be a good timing. These are just two examples of how to use these type of technologies to increase our capacity to program our network, reduce our costs, and improve our control. So I'm going to go through more practical examples here. Open source MANO is the first, our first foray in open source. So very early on, I think that Telefonica identified that there was a great opportunity as well as a great risk in the new VNF architecture. This entity of orchestration was going to be the app store of the network. And you've seen what happened with the app store of the phone. You ended up having a few dominant players that have a lot of control over what app can be made available where and how. And we thought it might not be the most desirable outcome in a telecom world. We thought that it is important that an orchestration entity be available and programmable for all network operators, but without too many dependencies towards specific vendors. And because we started NFV, generally speaking, as a means to reduce our cost through separating hardware from software, separating control from data plane, and reducing dependency from specific vendors, well, if orchestration specifically became a domain by which a few vendors had a lot of control, it would not be good for the industry because they would control ultimately which VNF and which service can be deployed where. So we started OSM as a means to create a movement by which orchestration would be an open source endeavor. And I think by and large we've been successful because we've seen several other open source efforts in the orchestration field. And in the end, it matters not whether people are going to deploy OSM or ONAP or alternatives because they're complementary for one end, but on the other hand, what's important is that they're deploying open source in this key strategic part of the network. That's an important part. So at Telefonica, we feel strongly that orchestration should remain an open source initiative and that as many operators that believe in keeping control on their network should contribute to this effort. So there are still a lot of work to be done, but we've made tremendous progress as an industry in this area, and that's something that we are deploying actually commercially in our network. So it's a great progress in this area. The second vehicle is the ONF. And ONF, the Open Networking Foundation, provides a number of open source initiatives. They're known for OpenFlow as an interface, a protocol rather, and then Chord as an edge computing architecture, ONOS as an SDN controller. Here, basically, we identified, just like with orchestration and Mano, that the edge of the network is a place where interesting things will happen. We believe that as network operators, we have a lot of assets already positioned geographically in this area. I mean, we have thousands of data centers or thousands of central offices that will become data centers. We have hundreds of thousands of towers that will convert themselves into an edge computing platform in the future. And realistically, what we're looking at here is extending the cloud closer to where services are being produced and being consumed. And being able to manage that infrastructure and manage the platform that will enable third-party and software developer to create services at the edge is going to be strategic. So we might not do it all, but we want to understand it all. And one way to understand it all is start by doing it yourself. So we've created a project called OnLife Network, by which we use a lot of open source components from a software, but also from a hardware perspective. We are deployed over an open compute architecture. We gave presentation on that in the past, but get in touch with me if you want more details. But the idea here is that we believe there will be significant value in providing services at the edge of our networks, and to capture that value and to make sure that is well integrated with our model, we need to have a better understanding of basically what makes the edge tick. And creating our own platform and collaborating with UNF is certainly a large part to that, and we'll see more announcements around that this year, in the next month, probably. TIP, Telecom Infra Project, is a large open source conglomerate now that has spawned a number of working groups. We started there with edge computing, looking at basically how to expand the work that we're doing in ONF, which is the development of a platform, to developing a business. And we ended up co-chairing the edge computing group. And then from then on, we started seeing many opportunities to collaborate and to use TIP as a vehicle. So we joined the board that was announced at the last TIP Summit last year. And we are co-chairing as well the Artificial Intelligence and Applied Machine Learning group, as well as the Power and Connectivity group. The task here for TIP is to extend connectivity to the next billions of people that do not have access to the internet today. And they won't have access to the internet with the technology that exists today, because it's frankly too expensive and not adapted to rural environment. So there is an opportunity to adapt, to simplify, and to create different architecture and business models in order to address that segment, and that's what we're exploring at TIP. Here we have a number of use cases related just to the edge computing work, but you have a number of use cases in every single one of the working group in which we're working. And we are also collaborating upstream, so all the work that we're doing in open source, we're not just a consumer of open source. All the code that we're developing find its way upstream. And as well, we are collaborating with a number of associations and a number of initiatives to make sure that the development we're doing in this area, both from a use case, from an architecture, and from a business case perspective, find their way into the rest of the community. So as an example, for instance, 5G Media is a European community sponsored 2020 work stream in which we are donating our on-life network platform, so the mobile edge computing platform that I was mentioning. Sorry, not mobile, multi-access edge computing. In order to enable a number of 5G use cases, and you have here 3 examples, virtual reality and immersive reality, so multi-party, multiplayer, immersive environments with ultra-low latency. Smart and remote media production that allows, for instance, TV producers to do video production in the cloud without having to send, a truck and a team to manage the production every time there is an event. And production and delivery of Ultra HD content in disaggregated CDNs. So these are a number of examples of how we apply our work in the open source community to practical use cases. You're going to see over the next few months more announcements in this area. I think that it is an industry opportunity to look at the edge and to look at open source as a way to create a new value chain and a new business model. And certainly at Telefonica, that's the direction we're taking. So we see open source as a very symbiotic add-on to our standardization activities, by which we can take the evolution of the standards and the evolution of the vision that we have collectively in our industry for the technology and apply specifically to use cases that we believe will generate new business models and new revenue for us in the medium term. Thank you. I don't know if we have time for question.
One or two.
Hi, my name is Sri. This is from Verizon. How different you think OSM is from OwnApp? Can you maybe list a couple of main points which I think is very important? You think from your side in terms of use case, maybe architecture, maybe whatever you can think of.
I think there are many differences. I think OwnApp is a platform that does a lot of things. And the orchestration part is actually a fairly small part of OwnApp. There are elements of OwnApp that are related to OSS, related to BSS, inventory, management. So from that perspective, I think these are fairly different projects in size. I won't talk much about OwnApp for obvious reason, because we're not part of that conglomerate, but I think that the element of OSM and OwnApp that are basically addressing the same need can be very complementary. And I do think that we will see operators deploying OwnApp with OSM. And I don't see necessarily the necessity to choose one versus another. Having said that, OSM is an open source development from the start. It's something that was created to be shared from the start. It's something that was designed from the start as a community based on the standard. I mean, OSM is part of the ETSI NFV standard, which is very different from developing something for a specific purpose and then making it available for open source. You know, both have pros and cons, and both have different level of maturity. I think, you know, publicly I could not comment really on how one could compare to another, but if you want to have a private conversation, we can certainly facilitate that. Okay. All right, well, thank you.